Well, thank you so much. I'm very delighted to be here. Obviously, it's a far more important visit to Brussels than one of Theresa May, who just is a total sideshow. But timing is everything. I'm really grateful to Bridie and Louise, who've been the most wonderful hosts, actually came and picked me up from Eurostar. And I think I'm preaching to the converted. I think this forum, what Full Circle does, is really, really interesting and mirrors what I do in London. How many of you are British, English? Originally a little bit, okay. So you know who Peter Mandelson is? Yes. So Peter Mandelson, the former EU Commissioner. And the only reason why I think of Peter Mandelson, which is not very often and frankly not very fondly, is that he very memorably in one of the elections that he won gave a very emotional speech in which he said, "I'm a fighter, not a quitter," and he was much mocked for this speech. But I've got to tell you, after about 10 years of talking about networks and modern connectedness and being kind of everything from laughed at to ignored, now this book is being taken seriously and I'm receiving lovely invitations like this. In fact, I have not stopped being invited to speak about it since the book was published. I do feel a bit like Peter Mandelson, that I am a fighter, not a quitter, and the ideas that I'm putting forward are finally gaining traction. So I'm just going to spend this time telling you my ideas and giving you, if you'll indulge me, a couple of short readings from the book, because the book is quite unusual in format. It's part autobiography, it's part polemic, it partly draws on really about 80 to 90 years of sociology, organisational behaviour, social network science. But the punchline is this: we are in an era of full connection, 150 short years after connectedness in all of its modern forms came into society, and we are not flourishing in quite the way we've been led to believe we would be, and arguably told we are. And so that's why I think this moment is happening, where I'm being invited to share my views. Not, I should say, from a Luddite perspective. I'm as addicted, happily, to technology as the next person. My career runs from telex to Twitter. This is not a sort of disconnect to connect kind of spiel. But it is to say, I think we are in deep trouble if we continue to believe that modern connectedness is completely marvellous, that we need more of it at scale rather than more of it differently. And the reason for that is that the modern world as we know it is not thriving. The subtitle in the hardback is Surviving and Thriving in an Age of Overload. The subtitle for the paperback is in fact going to be Social Health in an Age of Overload, for two reasons. One is that the idea of social health that I'm going to talk to you about has sort of gained quite a lot of traction. I've been writing about it for the World Economic Forum and people have picked up on it, and it appears to have landed. But the other is that surviving and thriving sounds a bit Ariana. It sounds a bit sort of lifestyle-y, it's all lovely, we need more sleep. And I'm really, with all respect, saying there's something very systemic about the change that we need to make. It's not all about personal improvement. It's about understanding that the world we've created and the world we live in, we need to look at the concept of disconnection within it, the disconnection that's happening and possibly the disconnection that needs to happen, as well as the fact of connectedness. So it's sort of a little bit philosophical. So I'm going to talk about the age of overload and why I think scale and speed are sort of the antithesis of what the human functions best at. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the idea of social health and where that came from. And then the third thing is I'm going to talk about the core ingredients of social health, and there's 3 of them, and then perhaps we can discuss it and debate it. But I thought I might just read you a little bit from the introduction called Peak Connection to Scene Set. Jacob Weisberg, writing in Slate in America, wrote, "What does it mean to shift overnight from a society in which people walk down the street looking around to one in which people walk down the street looking at machines?" So the very first cables of contemporary connectedness were laid in 1857, underwater between Newfoundland and Ireland. A core of copper wire encased in something called gutta percha and, quote, wrapped in jute yarn, which had been soaked in a composition consisting of 5/12 of Stockholm tar, 3/12 of pitch, 1/12 of boiled linseed oil, and 1/12 of common beeswax. These early telegraph cables were the start of an era that led ultimately to all modern connected life. The telephone, the car, the railroad, the aeroplane, the electric light bulb, the refrigerator, and of course, the computer. The global technology giants that we now rely on to connect people or objects with each other, Google, Alibaba, LinkedIn, Facebook, fill in the blanks, they're all direct descendants of the 19th century, and they're not newly born in the 20th or the 21st. Today, we have more opportunity to be connected than at any time in human history. Mobile, social media, and the internet, what the social scientists Barry Wellman and Lee Rainey call the triple revolution, make up the background hum in every corner of the planet. Today, they are faster and more continuous than ever before. The World Economic Forum notes that by 2020, there'll be 50 billion connected devices in circulation. And on one level, we connect with each other in the modern world, very much like we did in the olden world. Elif Shafak, the writer, talks about how our stories and therefore our destinies are interconnected. But there's an edge of madness creeping in to all of this, as the character in the novel May We Be Forgiven, a TV network executive who commits murder and mayhem, announces, "I am ever aware 24/7. And of course it was Mark Zuckerberg who in 2015, when 1 billion people were on Facebook in a single day, it's now 2 billion, just to give you the scale and the speed, Mark Zuckerberg said, and I quote, "It's just the beginning of connecting the whole world." And I thought, good luck with that, Mark. But that's actually, if you think about it, quite mad. Because, you know, we have limitations. So you've got 1 billion, now 2 billion on Facebook. You've got 6,000 tweets posted a second. You've got more data published in a single year than in the whole of human history. You've got scale and enormity running through society as if it's normal. And you have, by the way, enormous advantages of catch-up being played in Africa, in all corners of the world. So again, this is not an anti-technology speech, but it is to place in context the disconnect between the scale and speed at which social media and new technology is becoming embedded in our lives, and the reality that the human, and we are indeed all human, even Elon Musk would agree, the human operates at much, much smaller numbers. There's only 200 functional democracies in the world, if that. There's only 168 hours in the week, end to end. You know, we need to come into land and balance in the way we organise ourselves. The evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar, a man who I've got a lot of time for, who I've interviewed for BBC Radio, he's created the famous Dunbar number, which proves, give or take, that the anthropological maximum number of relationships we can all have at any one time is 150. So what's interesting to me is that on the one hand you've got the billions and the gazillions and the sort of enormity of the data-driven world, which is driven by data and technology businesses, most of them, by the way, emanating in Silicon Valley. And on the other hand, you've got the real world, only 168 hours in the week, in which we need to sleep a third of those. That isn't going to change anytime soon. Nobody is changing the physiology of humans. We might extend life, okay, but we can't extend the body clock. We can't actually say, well, we're going to have a 36-hour day. I mean, that hasn't changed since the Sumerian calendar. So all I'm saying is there's, within that disconnect, something that we need to learn. And why does this matter? Like, you know, maybe I'm just a sort of clever, cutesy argument going, oh, have you noticed? Big numbers, small numbers, isn't that interesting? Well, it matters because the world is not functioning very well. Productivity levels are stagnant. You know, the dialogue, the connectedness between policymakers and their publics is arguably disintegrating. The scale and speed of news and information, which is really only 20 odd years old, is degrading people's trust. Fake news didn't begin with Donald Tusk. See what I did there? With Donald Trump. Fake news began with a virulent spread of information that was difficult to contain. And just by way of example, there are two kinds of networks, the spread of which physicists who study network behavior call scale-free networks. In other words, there's all sorts of limitations on different kinds of networks, but a scale-free network, one in which things replicate and move beyond the control easily, are two things. One is an epidemic, an epidemiologically virulent virus. I see some sage. Are you doctors? Are you medics?
No, my girlfriend who is.
Okay. Well, I opened my book with the story of the Ebola crisis because it's a very instructive, I believe, illustration of network spread in all sorts of areas. So, you know, an epidemic spreads, this is bad, you need to impose quarantine, you need to impose disconnection. That is, in fact, the only way you can cauterize spread of something very bad and virulent, and it's extremely difficult. The only other example in society of a scale-free network which has the same virulent properties is, of course, the internet. Now, I'm not at all putting forward an argument for regulation, and I'm happy to talk about that, but that's not my argument. My argument is that we need to notice that the technologies that have ushered in this era have also unleashed some sort of viral spread in which we no longer trust pretty much anything we read or see. You know, you've even got Ann Coulter saying that the video that was dispersed by Donald Trump was sort of true even though it wasn't true. I mean, you know, you're talking about cognitive dissonance on a massive scale, which is not socially healthy. So my point is that the very thing that we believe has been great for us over 25 years has got drawbacks. So one of them is productivity, one of them is fake news, one of them is stress. 60% of working days in the EU, according to European Commission data, are lost to stress. One of the factors of stress are overload, impossible deadlines, targets, time management, blah-de-blah. So again, I'm not trying to paint a necessarily bleak picture. I believe we are now living lives that have moved from being over there on technology and networks to lives that are embedded so completely that every one of us in this room within 2 years is going to know somebody with embedded sensor technology in their bodies, if we don't already. We are experiencing what Francis Cairncross, the management writer, called the death of distance. And so the spatial dimension and speed at which we are dealing with knowledge, networks and time is to me both the problem and potentially the cure. So that's really my starting point, is that the age of overload is undeniably here, that it brings with it disconnects and discontents as well as many, many manifest benefits. We can't turn the clock back necessarily, but we can choose to insert the human fully into the machine age rather than basically outsource ourselves. I do not believe the answer for humanity or commerce or society is the driverless car. I just don't believe it. I think it's an idea fueled by silico-evangelism and greed and an infatuation with technology that is misplaced. There, I've said it. I know I might be completely wrong, but I still believe it's important to have the conversations that say, wait a minute, is this the answer? Just like those of my generation don't necessarily believe the millennials, many of whom, not all of whom, believe in a kind of generation gender argument that the entire future of the planet rests on sort of gender reassignment, realignment, fluidity and identity. That is a belief set. It's not my belief set, but that's what we need to understand about technology. It's a belief set. It doesn't have to be the truth and the only way. And we are absolutely at a tipping point. The next 15 to 20 years are the moment when AI, cognitive intelligence, artificial intelligence are going to become virulent. And so this is the moment when those of us that run lives, families, organisations, institutions have to decide. Do we outsource all our human capital to be second nature, second fiddle to the technology? Or do we say, no, we're going to do it differently? We can do it differently, but we have to want to do it differently. My favourite joke is the American psychoanalyst who says, how many American psychoanalysts does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is, of course, one, but that light bulb has to really want to change. So I'm interested in the motivation, in the cognitive environment in which we say, wait a second. So how do we say, wait a second? That brings me on to part two. I just need to find part two. It's actually quite interesting because I've just done the paperback edition and I've switched the order around of some things, which has driven my publisher mad, but I needed to do it. Anyway, I found it, but this is now going to be in a different place in the paperback. This is called Not Waving but Drowning. It's a sunny August day at the English seaside. It's 2007, and it's the first day of my family holiday in the picture postcard eastern coastal town made famous by composer Benjamin Britten's Aldborough Festival. Aldborough still emanates the 1950s of his day. Its town council regularly votes against increasing telephone mobile masts, keeping the area almost without mobile phone reception, and in fact people go to Aldborough to be disconnected. I decide to go jogging, despite the fact that I'm unfit and have had a streaming cold for what I realise only at this moment has been many months. A bunched tissue is permanently in my hand. But here I am, moving tentatively along a beach. I'm gasping a bit as I pound heavily and slowly along the shingle shore. I've not shed the extra pregnancy pounds from my third child, even though he's 2 years old. Everything looks vague and slightly out of focus. I was in my office until midnight the night before this holiday, finishing up work in a state of agitation. My to-do list did not seem to be going down. I never got to the when to do part, because I always seem to have to dive straight into an incoming tsunami of tasks. The new normal for workers like me, those in the knowledge worker business, service sector companies, startups, office-based jobs, where the light in the office may go off but work is carried home and continued there, was to be always on. But I consider myself one of the lucky ones. Love my job, love my family. I swim strongly in the sea of modern life, I think. I don't feel underwater tremors. I do not see or feel any signs that I am was in fact about to go under. I've run about 1,000 yards and my legs turn to jelly and I stop, shocked at the sensation that I am slowly filling with sand. The blue sky above me looks on mildly as I walk myself carefully back. God, I'm unfit. My husband and our combined 5 children are all at the holiday house. I feel horribly disconnected. My husband, it has to be said, I still am angry with him, thought I was kind of just slacking, just tuning out of family duties. But we decide to go to the local hospital after 2 or 3 days of me being just not right. And she turns to my husband, whose face is suddenly grey with realisation, and she says, the hospital 30 miles away is waiting for you, drive fast. And basically I got pneumonia and septicemia. It crept up on me. And I did nearly die, I obviously didn't die. And I realised as I reflected on why this had happened is that I was overloaded. The iPhone was in, Facebook was in, this era of always on, of juggle, of trying to have it all, do it all, was just overwhelming. And so at that point, as I recovered, because I'm the main breadwinner and because I love my work, and because I'd written in a different form about modern connectedness and modern communication, I began to be interested in health and connectedness and whether there was a connection. So I looked up, somebody tipped me off about this is networks for you. I looked up what the World Health Organization does and did and what it says about health. Next year is the 70th anniversary of that WHO coming into being. It took about 2 years, between 46 and 48. And what's interesting to me is that the definition hasn't changed. The definition of health, according to the WHO, is, and I quote, the presence of physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of injury and disease. So let me ask you a question. Hands up who notices the calorific or otherwise content of what they eat during a day. Who has ever counted a carb, a calorie, a protein, right? Who's aware of what... I don't believe you. Do you eat anything and everything? I'm looking at you. Yeah. You don't... Are you aware that there is a huge literacy around the nutritional content of food? So you know someone who counts a carb and a calorie. Put your hand up if you belong to a gym or some kind of regular thing, or know somebody who does. Final question, have you ever bought a vitamin or some kind of assisted thing? Okay. So here's what's interesting. All of us, myself included, are part of a $3.5 trillion industry. That's actually the only bit of data I would say I feel quite smug about having discovered for my book. Now, that's a huge amount. That's double the published size of the arms trade. So even if you think that the global wellness industry has sort of bigged up the amount, And even if you think that the arms trade has bigged down the amount, it's still a very large industry. And in 70 years, we have become literate and practiced about our physical and our mental well-being. We're not perfect, but we know, for example, that sugar, sedentary lifestyle, all those things are not good for us. My point is, we are in the middle of the triple revolution of social. No literacy, no practice, no market. I mean, Amazon may become the first $1 trillion social media company, but the point is there is no narrative around social health because we've believed that it's all marvelous, that it's all healthy. So this brings me to my final point, really. How are we doing for time? Good?
Very good, yeah. 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
So it just brings me to my point about what is social health. If you believe me that all is not fabulous in the connected garden, if you believe me that like your physical and your mental well-being, it would be good in your organisations and in your personal life to have some sort of literacy and practice, like, in diet now, people do or don't do the 5-2 or the fasting, or that we even know already in the last 2 or 3 years there's a much greater literacy about not just pounding the treadmill but having high intensity. We're moving very, very fast and deeply in terms of our understanding the connection between sleep and stress and mental fitness. What are the components of a connected health that means you don't get overload, overwhelm? Because when you do, you get tune out and burnout. You get a population in America that is really happy to have a president who lies to them on Twitter. And why is that? Because they want to tune out. They don't want the detail. It's too overwhelming. So what is the cost of just carrying on with infobesity? We don't like obesity, but we take infobesity like it's a good idea. It's not. What is the consequence of having bloated networks where we spend so much time online? It seems an innocent era when Facebook didn't let you work, didn't let you be on Facebook at work. We lost that battle. So the same correlation in the way we look at our physical and our mental health can be looked at in our social health. And there are 3 core ingredients that I call the knot. Imagine, if you even though it's quite light, just indulge me, close your eyes for 1 minute. Close your eyes. Please, bring your hands together. Just touch your fingertips. And imagine you have a short piece of string or rope or ribbon. Just imagine the colour of that rope or string or ribbon. For some of you, you might be on a yacht and have a bit of actual rope. For some of you, it might be a nice bit of silk. And imagine you just tie it in a knot. That knot is the way you can connect to your social health, because it is an acronym for the 3 ingredients. You may open your eyes. Thank you so much for doing that. That knot is no different to the 5 a day, which is a complete made-up campaign, but everybody sort of remembers it. Oh, I need my fruit and my vegetables 5 a day. The knot is, how do I manage my knowledge, my networks, and my time? My time is precious. I can't stretch it. I don't have enough of it. So at its simplest, treat your diary, your calendar, like your body. Don't let anyone put anything in it you don't know about. Take your time seriously. Look at the way your team's time is structured. Analyze it. Own it. Time is precious. Your networks. Your databases need to be renamed people bases. They are relationship based. Make them smaller. pull out small groups of people for finite periods of time. Understand that what we're doing in this room, the reason why events like this are so popular, is because there is a hierarchy of communication. Being on social media, being on email is a broadcast medium. Being face-to-face is intimate. It requires the 5 senses. You know, go back to your offices and instead of reply all, find one person in that chain and phone them up and have a cup of tea. Notice how much of that is happening around you. If you are already doing a lot of that face-to-face networking, you're probably very senior. The question is, are people further down the food chain professionally able to do that? And knowledge and information, make sure that you are auditing those sources of vitamins, really, that come in. You know, everybody got outraged about Facebook's algorithms and the groupthink that it created, but we all are, they were just reflecting back to us what we all do, which is most of us live in our own echo chambers. Most of us do not flip a channel. Nobody looks at Russia today because Russia's really bad. Well, you know what? You might learn something if you could bear to look at Russia today for 5 minutes once a month, just to notice what it's saying, as opposed to Euronews, as opposed to CNN, as opposed to the BBC. We are not getting a diverse diet of information. And the final point I would make is that whether we like it or not, we are in the age of overload. The old siloed era of rising up the hierarchy on our own, elbows out, that is over. We are all drowning, not waving. We need each other. We need to create new forms of collective intelligence. And I believe that part of that argument is to insert social health into the discussion about health. Thank you.